Hey folks, welcome back to another VanillaSoft webinar, another episode of Inside Fundraising. And the topic today is going to be all things student retention, with also a dash of recruitment, and we'll join the dots between those two things in due course. To take a challenging, tough talk introduction to this webinar, it has to be pointed out that if your donor retention was as bad as your student staff retention, it's fair to say you'd probably be taking urgent and drastic measures to address that situation. Why? Because, as we well know, acquisition is generally a more costly endeavour than retention. Well, the same applies very well to your student staff. It is more cost effective to take the necessary measures to ensure that your team stick to you like glue than it is to continually recruit, re-recruit, train, retrain, so on and so forth. So during this session, we'll be pulling together every available trick in the bag, or at least to whatever extent we can over the course of the next hour, and applying those various tricks to the issue of student staff retention. Ensuring that your student team sticks around at least until they graduate. As per usual, you guys are going to be in listen-only mode. The webinar is being recorded, and your continued listening represents acknowledgement of such. We will be right there with you in the chat, so please do share any hot takes that you may have in this context as we go along. I am joined once again by my fabulous colleagues, Emily and Danielle. You should be very well acquainted with them by now, so I won't waste time on a lofty introduction as I may have done on webinars gone by. But these guys are higher ed, fundraising, absolute all-stars, as we all know, all too well. So, setting the scene now in terms of what we're going to be covering over the next hour or so. We're going to be looking at recruitment, as I said, just getting the ball rolling with making sure we have the best applicants and those that are most likely to be with you for the long run rather than perhaps wafting off into the distance after a couple of shifts. Addressing the elephant in the room. And I'm going to leave a bit of mystery around that, but you may already be able to join the dots in terms of one of the biggest line items that tends to have an impact on both attracting the best applicants and also making sure that they stick around. Looking at all things, of course, retention, many strategies, ensuring that your students stick with you like glue, as we've already said, professional development ideas, the pizza party 2.0, moving away from the idea that pizza parties are sufficient in and of themselves, perhaps introducing some other items that might encourage retention on the staff side of things. And finally, flexibility in the workplace. So, kicking off now. We're going to set the scene, and I have to say we won't dwell here too long because I suspect you guys are better acquainted with the scene than you would like to be. But Danielle, if I can kick the ball to you in the first instance, as you work most closely with our customer base for the time being, what are we seeing in the space at the moment when it comes to the challenges of student recruitment and retention?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about this topic. It's brought up quite often in the customer success space. And what we're seeing is all too often. And what we're seeing is, it takes time to train the students. And as we all know, you're not training all the students on one shift. They all have rotating shifts. They all have different schedules. So you may be training 10 students, but it lasts 2-3 weeks because you're juggling all of their flexibility or lack thereof flexibility. And then a semester goes by and they don't return. So you're back to the drawing board, you're back to training, you're back to posting flyers, you're back to sending emails, and it's always been an issue in this space, as all three of us know, but it's becoming more and more, I don't know, it's more of an issue today, I think, than it ever has been, to be quite honest.
And that's exactly where I'd like to go next, because it does seem like this is a sort of unparalleled situation that we find ourselves in, where both the issue of recruiting students, just getting the requisite number of applicants to begin with, let alone hiring the relevant number of students, and then getting them to stick around, really and truly are more difficult than they've ever been before. Emily, would you hazard a guess as to why that might be?
Totally. Hate to bring it back to this, but the pandemic. I mean, if we want to talk about another elephant in the room, we're going to continue to be, right? We're going to continue to be bringing up the pandemic, and not to blame all of our woes on it, but a little bit, it was a total game changer for every aspect of all different kinds of employment. We were all able to come up with new ways to still be effective, which is fantastic. And the flexibility of remote work or hybrid work, a lot of great things came out of that. And we're still seeing a lot of really fantastic things in that space, quote unquote, this much out of the pandemic, whatever that continues to mean. But it really did change the availability of positions, especially in an on-campus kind of environment. It also is not as easy to take a room that's traditionally been in person. How do you pick up a quote unquote call center space, a room with a bunch of computers, turn it virtual? It isn't just as easy as snapping your fingers. So then as programs started to move back to campus, wanting to get people working back in person, as many programs did, you then have people that say, well, I don't know if I want to go back in person anymore. And hard to argue with that. All three of us are also working remote right now. That's what our company has done, And so I get it. We're all seeing it in a lot of different ways, but I think it is magnified just being an on-campus student job. Students have so many things to choose from: on-campus, off-campus work, internships, anything like that. So I just think the competition increased that much more dramatically. So it kind of amplified some of those problems when it came to the initial hiring and trying to be competitive on campus. But then it also continues to spiral, into the retention as well. If you can find something better elsewhere, of course, you're going to want to go advocate for yourself and do that too. So I just think the pandemic, if you want to put a finger on it, really amplified some of those challenges from a lot of different aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, more complex than ever, more moving parts, more competition, more distractions, if you will, vying for the students' attention. You, I think, brought this up, Emily, in one of our planning meetings, the idea that good retention begins with good recruitment, and getting the right students for the job is a huge part of that, therefore. And it does seem that if you're able to attract the quote unquote best students, they are more likely to actually kind of stick around and really dedicate themselves to the job itself. So I'm going to ask the question, how do we work towards identifying what is most likely to attract those best applicants and kind of really sing to them or make them tick in the context of any materials that you might be sharing to encourage applications? Danielle, do you have any hot takes on that?
Yeah, I think, the tried and true one job listing, right? One job description may fit a general public, but if we're looking to, like you say, Rachel, to kind of tick their box, what used to work for us was we would write a job description depending upon the type of major or the college, the student group, right? Because you may have some in humanities who are going to go into nonprofit work, right? Like that tends to be not a norm, but a trend. And so you write a description that meets that. And then you look at the school of, business and entrepreneurs and marketers and sales. I mean, heck, even like acting, right?
Yeah.
This is great, it's, it's improv. I'm like, you could show I'm not an actor, but yeah, I think the one job description trying to be perfect is never going to be, it's not going to tick every student's box. So trying to find the perfect student in different areas, you may look at your collateral that you're putting out and shape that. to fit their needs.
Absolutely. And actually, I always found that law students were great because they
law is great.
need experience in negotiating,
building
an argument and persuasion and all the rest of it. So they're perfect on the phone, albeit possibly a little bit melodramatic at times. Emily, any hot takes from your experience in terms of key line items that you might want to include that do tend to attract top tier students to the job?
Yeah, I think that top tier part is a really crucial aspect, just considering that not only are you looking to hire students, you are looking for the best of the best. Everybody wants good employees, but think about what we're asking the students to do. Talk with donors, make cold calls. That's challenging. We're giving them access to donor records and financial information, giving history, processing credit cards. It's okay to want the best students working for you for a multitude of reasons, but what we're asking them to do and the level of responsibility and trust that we're giving them, we need the best ones working. So I think that just to your point, that top tier level is what you should be thinking about, and aiming for the right students, I think, is a crucial part of the hiring process, not just looking for whoever will answer your job post or hand in their resume, however you're going about doing it. And I love what Danielle said about tailoring the job description to specific units on campus or specific areas of students so that they can understand that just because, you're an improv major or an acting major or a law student and you're aiming to go work in law, or you're aiming to work in Hollywood, or, whatever broad generalizations I'm currently making about everyone's professions, that doesn't mean that you can't do this role and have it relate and benefit what you're doing. And I think we all sometimes need that little bit of a leg boost to say, oh, it does relate and here's how. So I don't think there's anything wrong with helping them connect those dots, but more than just saying, try to recruit in a multitude of places and track your progress to see what works and try new things each semester. For me, what I'm most passionate about when it comes to recruiting students is treating it as a really crucial step and a really important part of your job, not an afterthought and not just something to get around to. And that's really hard to do because everyone's so busy and there's so much going on. And we could talk for 2 hours on this topic alone, but I think that to me is a really, really crucial aspect to recruiting well, so that you have the best students and then you can retain them and grow your program from there. So to me, that's the biggest takeaway that I want everyone to get is it's a really important aspect. It's not an afterthought. Time and dedication to the task at hand is I think the most important first step.
Yeah. And I think that's it. It's just applying proper time and thought and love to the task, which obviously applies to everything that's going to kind of move that dial in terms of the performance of your program overall. But really thinking about every little aspect of that job application that you're creating or job ad that you're creating, including things like the job title, right? Phonathon caller maybe doesn't sound as sexy as institutional advancement ambassador or whatever it may be. All of these things make a difference to the career-driven student, for example, or really conveying the opportunity to make a social impact and make a difference whilst also making some money and having flexible work and all the rest of it. So really being thoughtful with that. Now, I'm going to go ahead now and move our conversation on to what I consider to be the elephant in the room. And you guys actually may not have this on your screen in front of you, but we have a scene where two people are sat on a sofa. There's a giant elephant in between them and a huge bag of cash sat in front of that elephant. So use your imaginations as you will. But as such, the elephant in the room is indeed pay and monetary incentives, which allow you to attract the best folks to apply and help them, of course, to stick around. So, folks, without dwelling too long on the elephant in the room, any strong feelings on pay? Either of you want to jump in? Yeah, Danielle.
Go ahead, Emily. I think we both feel very strongly, but Emily, go ahead.
Sounds good. Exactly. Yeah. Lots of strong feelings. To me, something that is, I think, a little bit frustrating when it comes to student pay. It's just that sometimes what gets lost in the narrative is that we care about what we're getting paid. And so, of course, students do too. And there's so many things that have to go into the consideration of pay. And you probably aren't the only person that has eyes on your own budget. You might not even have any eyes on your budget, and somebody might be telling you what you have to work with. And you can only do so much with what you're given. And so all of this to say is you take all of this with a grain of salt. Huge caveat. You can only do with what you have in front of you, and you can only work so well within the constraints that you have. But I do think it's well worth the time spent and the money spent to work as hard as you can within those constraints and see how far you can push the envelope. Students need to be paid an appropriate amount. And it's really hard to know these days, I think, what that is. There's also probably some constraints that you have to consider depending on the university or the program you're at. With the rising minimum wage in a few different states, that also tends to affect universities different. And so you could be competing with other on-campus jobs. You could also be competing with off-campus jobs that aren't bound by the same restrictions that the university is. Yeah. So in order to make yourself as appealing as possible, you do have to figure out how you can pay as much as you can to be hopefully the top dollar employee on campus without putting yourself, in some hot water. I think something that you do want to keep in mind is that if you have a set budget or a set amount of constraints to work within, just consider, 5 years down the road what that might look like. If you can raise your starting pay to the highest tier, but that means you can never increase it, you could never give raises, you could never promote students and pay them more, you might need to scale back a little bit. It's really one of those, you have to look at the here and now, and then you also need to look, 6 steps in front of you. But students are looking for a job for a variety of reasons, but at the end of the day, they need to put money in their pockets. We all know working in this space that going to school, university, college, 4 years, 2 years, whatever, is so expensive. They need to put money in their pockets. They need to be able to pay their bills, even if all they want to do is have a little bit of extra spending money so they can go out and do whatever. They're also college students. That's part of their, job as the college students is to have some fun as well, I think anyway. So if we're drawing people in because we're the highest paying job on campus, that's fantastic. We need students that are going to work hard and work well and support the university. But if they're initially drawn to your post because you have a huge, awesome pay rate at the top of your poster, I'm all for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So that's my stance on pay. Very, very important, just like all of us want to do our jobs because we're also earning a paycheck. So that's right. That's where I land.
One of the strongest arguments that you can go to bat with in terms of increasing student wages is actually all of the invisible costs that don't get factored in around staff attrition, re-recruiting, retraining, lost calling hours, empty seats in the call room, all come with a cost. And if you think if we could just increase the student wage by like $2.50 an hour, we might not have such a problem with all of these things. It's also the case, as I think every engagement centre manager knows, that it's all too often those top 3 students that raise the same amount as the rest of the team put together. So whatever it takes to make sure that those 3 apply is kind of what we need to be doing. Now, we need to keep the conversation moving, but I know there's a whole host of other monetary incentives that are worth considering around kind of performance bonuses, retention bonuses, referral fees, prizes, vouchers, even indeed, perhaps controversially, commission. And actually, I was one of the only lucky beneficiaries of a commission scheme at the university student caller level that I've ever encountered. But let me tell you, I found it extremely motivating. Now, I do want to say it's not all doom and gloom in the context of recruitment. And I only have time today to shout out one of our customers who have absolutely crushed it recently in the recruitment context. And that is the University of South Florida and the wonderful Alison and Andres there, who we have been working with very closely as they relaunch their engagement centre this January. Now, there are a whole host of things that contributed to them being able to recruit 80 sparkly new student team members to fill their engagement centre. But a couple of ones that I just want to tease out, which were novel to me or that I've not previously come across, were the following. the space itself. Now, I'm not going to share any photos of that space today. I'm going to leave that to the team at USF to have their moment. But my God, is that a good-looking engagement centre? It is aspirational, inspirational, motivational, and that's just not something I'd ever seen before to that level. I said to the ladies on this call today that my call centre looked like a primary school classroom with handmade posters all over the wall, compared to this, which, as I say, is a seriously impressive centre and working environment for the students. They've also got free headshots being available to the students to help with future LinkedIn and CV building, all the rest of it, which again, amazing. Headshots don't come cheap. Indeed, I still don't have a professional headshot. So sign me up. I'll be an engagement centre caller at USF next semester. Mark my words. Free workshops around resume building, LinkedIn profile development, panel interview experience, free swag and university merchandise, which I thought was really cool. But highest pay on the campus, and that really seemed to have come from a sort of whatever it takes mentality from the USF leadership, which we absolutely love to see. So I'm going to move on there. Hopefully we can showcase the USF Engagement Centre in more detail in due course, but just wanted to highlight that it's not all doom and gloom. There are many means by which you can encourage a good number of applicants to come to your door. So we're going to move on now, in the interest of time, to retention. The struggle is real, guys. And that's me trying to get down with the kids, appeal to Gen Z at this point in the webinar.
No one on this call can.
The struggle is real. Who is dropping out? When are they dropping out? Why are they dropping out? Danielle, share your experience with us.
So, yeah. So the last school I was at, I had some competition, tough competition. I had students, 2 of my students went on, and this is no joke, went on to work for the United Nations. So, of course, they are not going to stay with me, right? But they were interning for the United Nations. So when they weren't interning, I did everything I could to make sure they were back in my center, right? And I think some of the things you pointed out that USF is doing, it kind of ties into what we were talking about with, getting the best applicant. You also want to, if they're the best applicant, you want to professionally grow them, right? Just like we all want professional development in our roles. None of us want to stay stagnant. I think capitalizing on that, I know we often have one-on-one evals. They should be tailored to that individual. Yes, always trying to meet the overarching goal. We're fundraising here. We're trying to engage, but speaking to it in a way that fits that student's personality, their needs, their development. I think they'll respect you for seeing them as an individual. They'll think that they're getting way more out of the job than just pay and, something to do for the 3 hours. They're looking past the graduation date. They're applying, okay, what skills do I need to grow now? And I think honing in on that was one of the things I did. If I had students that were in data science during the summer, if I wasn't calling, I could tell you those students, they were practicing what they were doing in class in my call center. They were cleaning, mining, segmenting. They were like, can I get hands on the data after we call? And it's like, great, let's do it. Hands-on experience. So I think it's just constantly making sure that it doesn't go stagnant. And it's very hard to do when you have 1,000,003 things going on as an engagement center manager, but not just seeing them as 10 students, but seeing them as 10 individual students and developing them individually.
And I think, that there seems to be sort of 2 camps for me from a attrition perspective. There's the better opportunity came up, presented itself elsewhere camp. And then there's something around kind of mismatch or poor alignment with the person maybe in the role. Either the role wasn't quite what they expected it to be, or maybe they just weren't really a particularly dedicated and committed individual to begin with, you know.
There are those.
And that's kind of the two camps for me. Now, Emily, I mentioned this earlier. You said something in one of our training calls to the effect of strong retention begins with strong recruitment. So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best to keep it brief because, again, we could talk on that the entire time as well. It goes back to kind of what I was saying before, where you could just be taking the first 6 people that walk in the door and, okay, well, you showed up for the interview and you said a couple of things and, you know, all right, fine, we'll work with you. And sometimes you might be in a spot where you do have to do that and you just have to take whoever comes in, and maybe you get lucky and some of them are good and maybe some of them are the ones you just described, Rachel, and it's not the right fit. You see you later. What I think is the ideal spot to be in is to be able to be competitive with your hiring so you can make your recruitment strong and actually bring in the students that not only truly want to be there, but are going to apply themselves, have the ability to learn and grow. And then when you're satisfied with your job, you are going to be more likely to stick around. None of this is a new concept. It's the same thing with professional staff. If you have a staff member that's engaged, they like what they're doing, or they're at least satisfied with it. Not everybody is going to wake up every day and say, you know, boy, this is just the best day of my life. I'm going to go sit down at my phone and make a bunch of calls. You know, that's not reality. But satisfaction in knowing that you're working hard and you're doing well and you're seeing results. So if people are doing well in the interview process and they're able to learn and grow and apply themselves, they're going to be more satisfied. They're going to stick around just like your professional staff will. So again, it kind of goes back to doing the recruiting well. Be competitive, have that high pay rate, be really attractive. And this grows over time. This isn't going to happen overnight, but over a few semesters, you'll grow a reputation on campus where people are talking about you. And, you know, the interview process is kind of challenging, but it was really worth it. You know, they really trained me well and they clearly value me being there. And we do some fun things at work too. And then you have more people that want to apply because they want to be in on that. And so then you have to work a little harder to get through the recruitment process. And then all of a sudden you have more applicants than you needed and you get to choose. And so you get to say, these are my best 10 and I need to hire 9. I'm going to hire the best 10, send the other 6 packing. If they can apply again in the future and be stronger, great. If not, they weren't the right fit, then you keep them and you needed 9 and you got 10. And then you have a little bit of buffer room for somebody to decide that the job wasn't for them or they do get an internship. And so then you have 9 good students you can help hone their talent and help them grow. So then you have students that want to stick around and, you know, the cycle continues.
And I think, as with so many things in life, that thing that you had to work a little bit harder to get, you tend to appreciate more.
So rewarding.
You get it. You know, if you feel like, damn, I'm proud to have been able to get through that process. And of all the people that applied, I was the one that selected after that really rigorous multi-part recruitment and interview journey that I've just triumphed over. And to that end, every step matters, right? Every step in that recruitment process matters. And then every step thereafter, once they've been hired, also matters. So, Danielle, do you have any insights or kind of tips, advice for folks around that initial training? So introducing people to the role, acquainting them with the value and purpose of what they're doing, and sort of setting expectations, those first few key meetings with the team.
Yeah. If you're able, and not everyone is able to do this, but I do think, you know, relating it to, I mean, everyone on this webinar has a job. All of us got hired at one point. We were excited. We had a new job. Whether we're a student or a staff member, you're a human being. You got a job. And I think feeling like it's my first day at work, right? Having that first day at work, what do we normally do? We get introduced to the company. We get introduced to the school. We have to learn the environment. We have to learn the mission and vision statements, all of that sort of stuff, and make it. I think if you're able to not just go dive right into, okay, this is how you make a call. This is the script. This is how you read the script. But you take a step back and you do some overarching, this is why it's important. This is what the money goes to, this is what donations go towards. This is how we're making a difference. This is what philanthropy is. And then also like drill down and like, what is advancement, right? Because I think it gets lost sometimes in the narrative. They're like, we're doing this job, but like, where does it go? What's the purpose? Who uses this information that I just updated, right? A student updates contact information. Who's using that updated contact information? The alumni office, like stewardship. So I think making the job as important as we know it is right from the get-go is super important to me.
Yep.
Super important.
And the other thing that I think you need to kind of set as an expectation is that there will be expectations of them.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh.
It's not a kind of turn up and try your best type of a job.
No.
We're going to be really working and dialing down in the first few weeks, but also indefinitely, and really trying to make you as good at this job as you could possibly be. And so that needs to be laid out in the beginning, because I certainly had experiences in the past of students that were not particularly open to feedback, which is very challenging.
Yeah. Well, I think it's way easier to start as bad cop and eventually be good cop. If you start with good cop, you're a friend. You're not an employer. Yeah. And so I think it's start with the heavy hand, and you can slowly but surely kind of loosen up a bit. Especially on those that you're like, you're a natural born fundraiser. Like, you get it. I want to keep you. Yeah. Obviously there's rules we got to follow, but yeah, definitely.
But again, kind of using this phrase, the right student, whatever that might mean.
I know, the right student.
The right student is going to be hungry for that. Like, they're going to want to progress and improve and do better, and eventually raise more money and kind of make a difference in their little sphere of influence. And so it's also really important then to have the kind of ongoing coaching and training and development and feedback. And Emily, you even kind of mentioned like progression goals and plans at an individual level. So again, not just generic, but like you specifically, this is what we're going to work on, and this is how we're going to chart your progress, which honestly, like, that's beyond what I ever got to. But I love the idea. Again, it's what you'd expect as a professional or employee of any other company, or at least a good company that you'd want to stick around and work for a longer period of time. And I think that ongoing development really sadly and unfortunately is quite often lacking. I think it's that kind of, I'll give you your 3 hours training, or maybe 6 if you're lucky, and then it's over to you. Like, good luck.
Sink or swim.
It's a kind of a missed opportunity on so many levels. But mostly just in terms of actually making them better and better and better and better until eventually perhaps they graduate. But again, you're going to help them when they do graduate in providing this ongoing training, coaching, development, etc. Now, another line item in that context is sort of promotional opportunities, which I think is always a bit of a tricky one. Because very often you don't actually want to promote your best caller to become a supervisor. But, there are potentially other progression and sort of career path type opportunities. So, Emily, could you speak to that in terms of any of those promotional type opportunities that you offered?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm a really big proponent of having your engagement center be owned by the students. You need a staff member there. They're the ones that are taking care of the data and troubleshooting as issues happen, and ultimately holding students accountable and employing them. But have your students be involved and give them opportunities to continue to grow their skills and open things up for applications for promotions. If you have and again, this comes with a caveat of, you probably have your own rules to follow, and this will also probably take a few semesters. But if you have the ability to have a 4-person student leadership team, or a 6-person or a 10-person, whatever it looks like, what else can you come up with that you can have the students own, for one? Then it does mean that you are free to then focus on other aspects of running the engagement center. There's no shortage of work. But then you're also giving the students that opportunity to learn and take some ownership, put it on their resume, keep them continuing to work for you. It's not that we want to make it seem that the phone calls, and again, there's other activities we do in an engagement center. We're texting, we're emailing, video messaging. There's a whole litany of work we're doing, but the big part of training that doesn't come the most naturally to people is going to be the phone calls, which is still an integral part of the work they're doing. It also is the hardest sometimes, and so it can be seen as the least enjoyable. So it's not that we want to incentivize, hey, apply for a promotion, you don't have to make phone calls anymore. That's not the message that we want to send, but it will be seen as a little bit of an incentive. If I can be promoted, I can train people how to do the phone calls, and then I'm not making the phone calls every day anymore. And that is appealing. And as long as you're not outwardly shouting it out like that, it kind of goes back to, if that's what's going to attract them to work hard and apply and do well, I'm kind of okay with that kind of flying as well. But all that to say is, if you could have some supervisor roles and maybe some training lead roles where they're in charge of the whole training process and they really get to own that with the new students that come in, that's fantastic as well. Maybe there's some other like behind the scenes work that you could have an even more elevated student do. Maybe they're able to be a supervisor and be promoted once more for their senior year. And maybe they can help you with things like tracking those bonuses or those raises and submitting them to you to put them into the system. And maybe they can help with, scheduling the students. And maybe there's like a student email address where the student callers could send their questions in so they're not directly emailing you. There's so many different ways that you can do that. And again, it just means there's more opportunities for students to want to stay engaged because, okay, well, I'm going to start as a caller. I'm going to work here, and then I'm going to grow these skills, and I'm going to ask these questions, and then I'm going to apply to be a supervisor. And then after that, I'm going to go apply to be the person in charge of scheduling, whatever the case may be. But that's 3 more years you have out of that person. So again, I've not enough good things to say about having a student leadership team.
Yeah. And the other thing that I was just thinking as you were speaking there is, so in my call center, you sort of got promoted to supervisor and never called again, more or less. Sure. It was sort of a one-way track, and you then were in a leadership position. But maybe there's scope for kind of more in the way of hybrid progression. Absolutely. Where actually you do one shift a week as a supervisor and 2 or 3 as a caller. You keep your foot in the trenches, which is actually generally a really good thing if you're going to keep coaching and training other people. Yes. You also make sure that your best callers are still making calls. You give them the opportunities to learn. Maybe they get paid at a slightly higher rate for that one shift a week, and then kind of whatever it may be. So I think that's quite an interesting idea as well, because that was always such a heartache for me when the best callers eventually got promoted. I reluctantly had to promote them and more or less take them off the phone. The other thing. Go ahead.
I'm interrupting you, Rachel, and I apologize, but this is a really important point that I wanted to include, because it is hard when you see the best caller in the room get off the phones and go be a student supervisor or training lead or whatever. That's why the interview process and the application process is so important, because you can be the best student caller, and that doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be the best at training somebody else.
True.
On the flip side, you might not be the best caller. You might not be bringing in the highest dollar amount, but man, are you good at teaching somebody how to do it? And as long as you understand what they're supposed to do, some of the best student leadership team members I've seen have been, maybe hovering right below the top because they get it, agree. They're good at it, they work hard. But that's why it's important to have that interview process. So you had said that, I just wanted to make sure we shared that.
Yes, and actually perhaps it was strategic on my part, because I also just didn't want to promote the true all-stars from a fundraising perspective. Balance, but there was that group that were very process-driven, by the book. The call was quality. Almost you scratch your head as to why they weren't the top fundraiser, but for some reason they didn't have something that your kind of top 3 or 5 did. Now, the other thing that's becoming quite interesting potentially for these all-stars, if you will, is promotion into a more portfolio-based outreach model or sort of role where perhaps they are a sort of junior engagement officer, if you will, or student ambassador, student annual giving officer, or whatever you might want to call it. And that, again, might really appeal to someone with a certain sort of personality and skill set, maybe that does want to get more into the business type world where actually they're hungry to work to targets and metrics and really develop individual relationships with folks. And that's quite unique experience to get at that age and that stage in your career. So I think that's also presenting itself as a really interesting promotional opportunity. And again, could potentially be hybrid, doesn't necessarily have to be a one-way street there. Danielle, I know you are particularly kind of interested in also opening up broader work experience opportunities, and actually you've both already alluded to a number of items under that, but any more ideas in terms of other activities we could be getting our students involved in to lend to their interest and expertise?
Yeah, I took it outside of the engagement center. It was still development work, but you kind of, sort of like a portfolio. Some of them had a portfolio and they were kind of like mini development officers, right? I never put two and two together until you mentioned this, Rachel. All of them were like finance based, or they were in business because they were very like, this is what I'm going to be doing. But then I had some people that were just naturally good schmoozers, so to speak, right? Like I was like, oh, okay, you're really good on the phone. How are you going to be in person? And they were just good at that. So they became like, they could advance or promote to an ambassador. They were already an ambassador, but in the engagement center. And so we took it past that and we would take them to donor events, alumni events, and they got very exclusivity to these alumni and parents. They were networking. These students were networking with these individuals. They were helping me. They were helping themselves. You might already have a student philanthropy council at your college, school, or university, but that doesn't mean it can't be something that's in conjunction with that, right? They may not be part of the student philanthropy council, but maybe that's how they get in, or it's kind of like it's the student philanthropy council and your hired ambassadors that get to go to these events, right? I think that's where I had a few students that, God, they were just gifted, but I didn't necessarily want them like running the shift. And I didn't want them off the phone. So I just was like creatively like, how else could we get you to fundraise? Sure. You want to secure some of those President Circle gifts in person? Let's go do it. Yeah. So you just have to kind of think about their skill set, get creative.
Right. Skill and personality-based role assignment, I think, is also huge in retention, right? Like some callers would really just want to make thank you calls, like that makes their heart sing and they feel a little bit uncomfortable asking people for money, but damn do they do a good job of kind of giving heartfelt thanks and really conveying impact and that type of thing, versus others that will get a real buzz of converting like a future donor or non-donor, as we call it in the UK. But then also, again, providing perhaps broader opportunities still to get work experience in marketing or events or heck, like trusts and foundations. Why not? Like let them kind of shadow someone for a day. Social media, major giving, video content production. There's so much experience that you could just give people, as you say, exclusive access to by virtue of being a member of the kind of advancement team and operation. And again, CV building, etc., as we've already mentioned. So moving now to the kind of warm and fluffy stuff. The next slide is Pizza Party 2.0. So thinking a little bit more creatively about how we make our students feel valued, how we celebrate their hard work and success and show them what we appreciate them. Emily, any particular top tips or things that you found to be effective in that context?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me is keeping a balance between some of the more fun, lighthearted, and the professional aspect, everything that we've been talking about. The biggest thing with a group of students is it's a room full of people doing the same job, but as Danielle said earlier, they're all individuals. So what works for some of them is not going to work for others. And this isn't the environment where you're going to want a student to feel like they're only being valued in one way, or they think something is dumb. I mean, they might not be the person that thinks it's fun to come to work and win a prize and, also have dinner provided. That might not matter to them, but they could really care about the headshots, for example, or the resume feedback. You also have the other student that comes in and is like, I really don't care about going to donor events. Like, I am here to earn a paycheck. It works in between my classes. I'm going to a party after work. This is all I want to do, but I'll totally take free pizza. I mean, it totally can go both ways. And so I think having that balance of the fun and the professional and recognizing that it isn't going to work for every student in the same way is, to me, kind of the most bottom line important part. And I also would just say that it's important to listen to students' preferences as well. If one incentive for the night is everybody gets a 15-minute break instead of a 10-minute break to take as a team and you all get pizza, someone who doesn't want to get off the phones and go eat pizza, don't make them get off the phones and be social. Like, I'm that person sometimes. I don't want to be social. Like, I'm in a groove. Like, I want to keep working. But on the other hand, if you tell somebody, okay, you have to come to this event as part of your job and you have to go network, equally, I think that's the wrong way to do it too, because I'm also that person. If you told me when I was a student that like you have to go show up on Saturday as part of your job description, I'd be like, oh, that isn't what I actually applied for originally. And this is just my job and I have something else I'm doing. So I love everything that we've said so far and I stand by all of it. As long as we're recognizing that they are students and it's not going to work for everybody every time.
Yeah.
That's my best tip that I can come up with.
And I think, all of the warm and fuzzy stuff is great. All of the kind of fun stuff, competitions, prizes, games, sweets, chocolate. Actually, though, more recently, like vegan treats. For the woke students. No, sorry, I'm getting carried away now with my reining it back in. All of that stuff is great. Celebrations, team building, perks. But actually, I think nothing beats like a sincere thank you and just a show of gratitude and like, wow, like you guys are freaking crushing it today or this week or this month, or like, my God, look at the progress we've made like this month versus last month. Like, think of the difference that you're making. And then ideally really working to connect them to the fundraising beneficiaries. And that could be simply keeping them abreast of kind of updates and things that you're actually funding and paying for by virtue of the engagement center output, or even better, like getting beneficiaries into the engagement center, like someone that received hardship funding, someone that benefited from the medical research that maybe your university is fundraising for that semester. And then they have that like, whoa moment of like, okay, if I can make $100 this week, like that's $100 more that's going to like a great cause. And that I think can so often make the difference between someone kind of giving up after a hard shift and be like, well, damn, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to try again. So that was something that I found really effective.
And you can provide pizza, like, do the pizza party. Like, that's fine. If there's a really cool spot in your campus, that's like, that's what your university is known for.
They want food.
They want food. That's fine. As long as you're not thinking that, well, they're going to stay working for me because I give them pizza once a quarter. Like, we are past the concept of pizza being your bonus, your raise, your reward. So it has to just be a combination of things. But I totally echo all of that.
Now, the final thing, folks, and we've got about 5 minutes to cover off this topic before we need to wrap up. As ever, an hour has absolutely flown by, is the question of workplace flexibility. And there's, some folks that are in the kind of you give them an inch and they take a mile camp, and others that are like, you know what, flexibility can work and it can pay off in terms of helping students be able, if you will, to kind of stick around as a member of your team, whatever that might look like. So some of the key topics here, from my perspective at least, are providing year-round work opportunities. So if students want to be able to work over the summer or between campaigns, make sure that they can do so. Allowing them to have less work when they need it, but also more work if they want it in the course of a given semester. And again, different students have different needs from a financial perspective, oftentimes, as well as shift covering in that context and possibly remote working. So I'm just going to open forum to each of you. Danielle, any of those topics particularly light your fire?
I had my students working round the clock, other than, during, not because I was like, whipped, had my students whipped, but because there was opportunities outside of calling, texting, all of that. There was stuff that they could do before, a certain, in the morning if they wanted to during the summer, come into the office, right? Do a couple of things, then they head out, right? And have the rest of their summer day. During finals, my students didn't work during finals unless they and I made it very clear, I was always an open book. No one is working this week unless you tell me you want to work. And it was usually light, a light load, because I didn't want them to work their full 20 hours and then be panicking about finals. So I kind of had to be that parental, okay, we're not going to go hard. But yeah, you alluded to it, Rachel. It became very clear who was going to pick up extra shifts and who wasn't. So then I would go to that person and say, hey, I have some extra work. Did you want to work on Friday? And they'd be like, yes. I knew who to go to. Now, I only worked, pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic, I'm going to be very clear. I did not work post-pandemic. I don't know what post-pandemic is. We're kind of still in the pandemic, but I didn't work in a hybrid world. They were all remote because of the pandemic. So I don't know how I feel about letting them work from their dorm room. I'm just going to keep it at, I don't know how I feel. Haven't been in your shoes.
Emily, anything stand out to you in the context of workplace flexibility?
I think it really depends on the size of your program. I agree with everything both of you have said so far, no surprise there, but it really also just depends on in-person, hybrid, remote, how many students do you have working for you? And then also just set your expectations early, decide what they are. If you have a flexible attendance policy, outline what it is and outline what the parameters are, and then stick to it. I think the follow through is important. It's really easy to have a student come to you that you really like, or they're the best earner in the room and they're a great presence and they screwed up their schedule and it means that they have to have 1, 2, 3 consequences, but you really like them and you want to be nice about it. So you give them an inch, then you have 20 students out your door that heard about it because the walls have ears, and then you have to do that for everybody, and then your attendance policy is non-existent. So set your expectations, follow through on them. Sometimes it means you have to have the tough conversations. Sometimes it means you might be firing the top performer. And I've done that and it sucks. I mean, it is brutal. But if you're going to follow through, you have to hold yourself and everybody else to that, whatever they are. But you also, again, know your students. If you have 10 students working for you, that's a lot different than having 150. So there's a lot of differences.
Very different.
When you're working with different size institutions and rooms. So those would just be my comments to add.
Yeah. And again, I think from my side, it's just kind of recognizing that if the student in question needs more work or more income than you can offer them, they are going to go and find that elsewhere. And initially they might use that to supplement, but eventually probably it's going to start competing, and eventually you lose that student because you couldn't offer them a third shift a week, for example. Because even if you are the best paid employer on the campus in town and you're, paying them $5 above the next employer, but you can only offer them 6 hours a week, 6
100%.
months a year, that maybe isn't going to cut it. So,
math starts to,
Yeah, so it's something to consider, right? And again, I think it's just important to have some opportunities and flexibility in that area. Yeah. So, folks, it's time to wrap it up. So I'm now going to kind of do the honors and bring this thing to a close. I've completely humiliated myself and shown myself to be a much older human in the body of a millennial. I am as unwoke as it gets over here, but I'm trying. But actually, I've always been a bit of an old soul. I remember once when I was managing my team, and I was only a few years older than the students, not remember, and I did some kind of pop culture reference, and they were like, wow, miss, like, you're so down with the kids. And I'm like, I'm only 2 years older than you.
Gosh, it's the worst.
But obviously I was giving much older person energy. So, folks, dialing back in seriously now, I do want to reference back to an amazing webinar, if I can say that, blow our own trumpet, or panel discussion that we put together in the spring of last year under our GiveAcon event, featuring a whole host of sector professionals, Josh of the University of Oklahoma Foundation, Julie Knight of Carnegie Mellon, Jen Eggers of the University of Minnesota Foundation, Madison McCall of Princeton University, and Clark Gaffke of Lead Philanthropy. So do reference back to that if you're hungry for more ideas in the context of student recruitment and retention. No doubt you will find them in abundance in that panel discussion. Our next webinar will be a spotlight on our fabulous customers over at Emory University, and in particular the incredible Deja Walker, who you can see on screen, who has sent Emory University's credit card fulfillment rates soaring whilst navigating significant PCI challenges and constraints on their side, as well as integrating ever more in the way of creative multi-channel touch points. So don't sleep on that. That's coming up next month. As always, myself, Emily and Danielle would absolutely love to connect with you via any channel of your choosing, but the opportunity to connect with us on LinkedIn specifically is currently presenting itself on your screens. At this time of year, we'd also strongly encourage you to reach out to a member of our sales team, because whilst the end of the fiscal year and budget planning seems far off just now, as always, it will be with us well before we know it. So we'd love to hear from you in that context. But until next time, folks, once again, we thank you so much for tuning in to VanillaSoft's Inside Fundraising. Emily, Danielle, I appreciate you. Listeners, we appreciate you. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.